Hey everybody, welcome to another Artist Talk here with the Swords and the Plowshares folks. We're here with a couple of cultural workers who helped us pull together our most recent poster show, Solidarity and Struggle, that kind of reviews a bunch of movement posters from 2022 and various struggles that have gone on from artists all around the country and some folks around the globe. We're going to let them introduce themselves, and we're going to hear a little bit more about how this all came together, and then just dig into how the hell art can help change the world for the better, and not just be insular. But yeah, does anybody want to introduce themselves first?
Sure, I can go for it. It's really exciting to be with you, Ian, and to hear all about the work that the gallery is doing. It's been awesome to view it from afar. Um, and so I'm excited to have this discussion today. I'm Hannah Craig. I live in New York City. And I work with International People's Assembly, which is a network of trade unions, political parties, organizations, and people's movements on the left throughout the world. And I do a lot of work in terms of art and culture in our networks. And I'm really excited to be talking and thinking and building artists who are doing this kind of work on the left. So thank you so much for having us.
Of course.
Awesome. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Vivek Venkatraman. I'm a organizer and artist, designer living in Houston, Texas. Like Hannah said, I'm really excited to be here too. You both are like two of my favorite artists in this movement. And Ian, it's nice to get to see you and talk to you for the first time off of Instagram. I'm really excited about this conversation. Hannah and I have had the chance to work together and sort of have some conversations about art and its place in struggle. So it's great to open that conversation up more broadly. And thank you for all the work you're doing at the gallery space. Honored to be in conversation with you all.
Same. Yeah, I think let's dig into all the questions, but first, maybe if y'all can just give some background, I've been giving folks a rough estimate of where these posters came from. I participated in some of the calls, but yeah, can you give us a little background around how these works have been gathered, your various calls for solidarity this year, and kind of how we ended up with such amazing artwork in our gallery?
Awesome. Yeah, I can definitely start answering this, and then Vivek has a lot of work in all of the shows that came together, so can probably talk more about the production and stuff too. But so the show that's up right now has posters from 3 different projects that happened this year alone. So it's been an exciting year. The first was the People's Summit art show that happened at the People's Summit in Los Angeles in June of this year. It was a counter summit to Biden's Summit of the Americas, which we all know is a summit of imperialism, basically, and historically and definitely this time around left out some extremely important figures in the Americas, including Cuba and Venezuela. And so the People's Summit came together to really respond to the exclusion, and to build our own summit, showing that the workers and the people of the Americas, we want to get together too, and we have our own political struggles to wage. And so, of course, part of that political struggle is the struggle that we wage within the realms of art and culture. I think we all believe that and see very concretely the way that art plays a role in the shifting of politics. And so it was something we really paid attention to and highlighted in the People's Summit. We had over 100 works that were on display throughout the 3 days of the summit itself in Los Angeles. And it was just a very celebratory atmosphere. People were able to kind of walk through the exhibition, which was outdoors. And these works were made by people all over the world, artists, designers, some people who do this, who make work as a profession, and people who make work for the movement, some people who this was their first time being exhibited, and other people who are seasoned artists who have been showing like this for a long time. So it was a really, really exciting exhibition when it first started. And the idea was that really the People's Summit was meant to spring and start all of these different projects, or bring unity to our movements as a whole. And so along those lines, we wanted the People Summit exhibition to be able to travel across the country, not just stay where it was in Los Angeles for those 3 days, but to be able to have an audience much further on. So it's very exciting that the show, or at least some pieces from the show, are in the Midwest now. So that was the first project. Then the second project that's part of the show is a call for art that we did as the International People's Assembly North America, along with Capire, which is a feminist news organization that is throughout the world, but has a big base in Brazil. And so a lot of Brazilian artists were able to kind of see that in New York. And so that exhibition was on display, right directly after the decision, the Roe versus Wade decision that kind of like put abortion rights on the table, and spurred the beginnings of what is a mass movement for abortion rights. And so yeah, all of those works were on display in New York. And then finally, the most recent exhibition that's part of the show is a show called Reverberations, which was an open call for posters that calls for sovereignty in Haiti. And this exhibition came together really quickly, and I think shows how dedicated artists in the movement are in terms of building artistic solidarity when the moment calls for it. Of course, the exhibition is super political and recognizes the need for sovereignty in Haiti, and that we have to fight against imperialist aggression that we see happening when we see it happening. So those are the three works, and we can go into the projects more deeply too, but that's kind of overview.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't know, Vivek, if you have any like thoughts on your, like I participated in these calls as well, but you have participated in all of them very extensively. So yeah, what was it like kind of being an artist in these calls for work? And like where are you coming from when you're kind of like you got a week to make a poster to strike back against something that's happening right now?
Yeah, it's always a bit of a roller coaster, right? For me at least, I don't know if this is true of you, Hannah, or you, Ian, but I usually will make something and then like hate it for a few days afterwards and have to like go back and really kind of like finagle with it to feel good about it, to feel like it's sort of hitting the themes I was looking for. And in a short time span, it's a lot harder to do that. So you kind of just have to like be decisive and move forward with something, which has like its own creative value. I think the constraint provides some creative value. I think Hannah did an amazing job of outlining these art calls. She's responsible for bringing all of them together, and I'm so thankful to be included in them. I will say one thing that's really special, I think, about these art calls that have happened that Hannah mentioned are the sort of like internationalist quality to them. It's such an amazing opportunity to be able to see the work of our comrades and fellow cultural workers across the globe who are engaged in some similar struggles to us, but also their own kind of unique struggles that are, unique to their geographic and political context. And some of these art calls like very explicitly encourage like collaboration between artists from different parts of the world. I've gotten to do one with an artist from Cuba and really like share our experiences and kind of the similarities and differences of our struggles, learn about sort of like their approach to creating art based on their sort of own rich tradition of art creation and cultural production in their part of the world. So I think that's really important. Like as the struggle intensifies, like the revolutionary struggle intensifies, sort of knowing what's happening in the rest of the world, opening up conversations about art and culture with people in other movements is really, really important. And I think, in my opinion, the only way we're gonna advance our struggle here. So I've really appreciated that about this art call. They're not just sort of like Western centric or like Eurocentric or something. They're truly internationalist in like the truest sense of the word.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would firmly echo that. And I think it really comes through in the exhibition that we have up. I think we've had a number of comrades and community members come through who are very surprised. I think they were they're used to seeing a certain thing from like kind of like peace and justice spaces, sometimes in the United States. And you come through and you get a little bit more explicit critique of like who is causing the lack of peace and justice in the world. And like what actual peace and justice means is often people controlling their own lives, not being told what it means by somebody in the West. I think that really comes through in each of these. And I think I was also moved by some of the solidarity from the international sphere around like Roe versus Wade, where I think like often we act as though American problems are American problems. I don't know, I at least don't expect that international solidarity back in some ways because of everything our country has done. But to see folks just turn around and make artwork sort of like, no, y'all are also important and your struggles are also important to us, I think is, yeah, very inspiring to see kind of reciprocated. And so, yeah, maybe we can dive a little bit more into that thorny question of like, how does art actually kind of like contribute to struggle or contribute to changing the world? I think maybe just to frame that a little bit, there's kind of sometimes the avant-garde artist of like, if I just make something so profound, the world will change around it. If like the painting remolds everyone's mind who looks at it, then we will have justice. I don't think any of us are in that boat, but like, yeah, what are your kind of takes on like how does art interact with social change?
I could start, and then I'm very curious to hear both of your thoughts too. Well, I think when I think about this question, the first thing that comes to mind is kind of a term that Fidel kind of came up with and popularized around the battle of ideas. And I think that, I mean, that just those words together elicit some kind of vision or like a picture in your head of what that looks like. But I think it really does illustrate what it is that we're doing in terms of art and culture and building our movement inclusive of art and culture for the working class, in building projects of socialism and internationalism. I think so. This idea of the battle of ideas recognizes that we're in a moment where we have to wage battle by winning people over, by helping to by showing that another world is possible, that we can build something as workers, that we can build something new. And I think in order to wage this battle of ideas, we have to be present in all of the places that are most popular for us to be. And I think those places are often places of culture. We go to concerts, we go to the movie theater, we even on the street, we see dancing happening on the streets. We have to be like, as people who believe in these movements and in people's struggle and in building movements for socialism, I think we have to be very present in these spaces because they're some of the most influential spaces that people occupy. There's this term that we sometimes talk about, mística, which is like a Brazilian term, and has to do with like this feeling that you get that makes you want to move forward with struggle, or that like that makes you excited to keep on struggling. And I think we really have to embrace that on the left and in our movements, especially in North America, because I think we see it a lot in other places, but a lot of art and culture has really been co-opted in the kind of neoliberal world that we live in right now, and we have to grab a hold of art and grab a hold of culture and really wield it in order to wage our battles. Yeah, so maybe I'll leave it there, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah, I'll share a little bit. I think that's like a really good summation of like the problem and the potential solution. Like one example I like to give to people when talking about sort of what is an artist's place or like a creative producer's like place in the struggle if you just like open Netflix, something we all probably spend time doing, you swipe through Netflix, like every other movie is like some sort of militaristic, imperialistic, like propaganda. It's like completely inescapable at this point. Whatever you turn on, whether it's TV, film, theater, like art, anything in the sphere of culture, especially in the United States, is completely dominated and inseparable from like the hegemonic, like ruling class narrative. It's really hard to find anything outside of that. And so like, of course, naturally, like people consume that and it sort of like reinforces certain ideas and narratives for them. And so like our job, I think, is to really like unlock the like imagination of working class people about what's possible, about what a better world might look like. And I think like in like Marxist discourse, we talk about like base and superstructure. The base sort of being like the mode of production or like the relationship that people have to the means of production. And then things like culture sort of live in the superstructure, right? But those things really influence each other. So in order to, the culture is the way it is now because of the sort of economic base, but the culture also reinforces the economic base. So every time you see that imperialist sort of propaganda or militaristic propaganda, like when you're watching a sports game or something on TV, it reinforces like people's belief in the economic system that we live under. And so, and like capitalists realize this, they care a lot about it, right? We've all heard about like how the DoD, Department of Defense, like influences Marvel movies, or like they're so deep into popular culture that the only way to counteract that is for us to strategically, like in some sense, like use those same tactics, like influence culture in a way that we can sort of start to change that narrative. And it's a really challenging thing to do here in North America. And I think like that's why we're focusing so much on it. It's to unlock people's imagination, and it's to fight back strategically, and in some cases using the same tactics that the capitalists use.
If I can just add one thing, I think it's so key what Vivek just said about like strategically using those same skills, because I think sometimes there's this tendency to see like, yeah, it's bad what the capitalists are doing in terms of like making this propaganda, and like we're all exposed to it, and then we can see how the ruling classes media like really influences our culture and how we live. So I think there's a tendency to see that and be like, okay, we have to do the exact opposite. Like we can't make anything that looks like their stuff. We can't make anything that even slightly resembles it because, or uses the same tools, because we really want to like differentiate the people's movements from what the ruling class is doing. And of course, we do have to differentiate our ideas and to make our own aesthetics and make our own like way of building, but we also can't move so far away from that method of production, because the reason the reason that the ruling class is using those tools is because they work and because they're really effective at like disseminating information. So I think that's kind of like the tricky area that we find ourselves in, is figuring out how we build our own look, how we build our own materials and like cultural work, but we can't move so far from it that it's like things that are not even attractive to people or popular in like a massive sense.
Yeah, and I think that sort of gestures towards like that tension where some folks think revolutionary art is making art that has not yet been seen or in no way looks like something, as opposed to the orientation of that art around the class struggle or around like liberation struggle. And I think that like sometimes people mistake radical form for a potential radical content. Or think that the simple act of form can kind of replace that radical content, and the ability to communicate with people outside of like 30 people at an art gallery. And I think that like there's tension there. I think like posters aren't gonna do all the work. I think also being able to make longer form, fine art. I think like the working class deserves good art, and to explore new forms of art. But I think like holding that tension, like you're saying, of like, but it also should be relatable and connected to life and connected to like yeah, not 17 layers of degrees and obscure references. Yeah, I think that that sort of is like something I kind of think about a lot. And just something I picked up on what I think in each of you were talking about is sort of like this theme of storytelling. I think that art plays a huge role, I think, in sort of like translating history and memory and how we see each other in our movements, where I think like all of us or a lot of us in the movement will read a lot of books and we hear a lot of statistics, but like I always like an example for me was like I read Vasily Grossman's book called Stalingrad about like there's a Soviet book about the experience of sort of like being invaded by Nazis and that cultural experience on a vast scale. And that did a lot more for my understanding of like that experience than reading statistics of like the horrors of Nazi aggression and the horrors of like what the Soviets were forced to do to hold back that tide. Um, and so I think like that way of like there's something beyond a recitation of facts and a recitation of statistics and like history that I think culture and art really let us grasp. I think in my work, I also think a lot about how we see each other. So I do a lot of portraiture, and I do portraits of like movement figures on like the grand sense, like you got the Lenins and such. But I don't know. I think there's like a lot of folks in the movement who don't like. I see this with artists, where they don't see themselves as artists, but they also like are doing like work all the time, and like their community like loves them, but like they don't get to see that as much. And I think art can play a huge role in showing people like the importance of their work, the importance of them to their communities, like seeing yourself in that pantheon of memory and of tradition and of struggle, I think also plays a huge role in helping connect us. And at least with my work, that's something I think about a lot, is like that way that we can see ourselves in those of the past and see ourselves in a future that's better through art and culture.
Can I make just a really quick PSA? If anybody watching this has not seen Ian's artwork, please go look at it. When you mentioned the fine art stuff, and I see the Ho Chi Minh in the background, I am such a huge fan of like the fine artwork you do, and it's like been really inspirational to me too, to think about like I imagine you spend a lot of time on those pieces, and sometimes when you're making posters, like expediency and speed kind of takes the front seat, especially for things like art calls where you have limited time. But like seeing you produce that work has been really inspirational to me, and sort of like helped guide me towards like being a bit more reflective and like thinking more about the sort of process and spending time with it and not rushing something out. So I'm sure everybody watching this has seen your work, but I really want to make sure they see it. It's fantastic.
Oh, Hannah, you're muted.
Oh, I was just gonna interject and say I totally agree, and I think what you were saying about posters before, it's like it's true. Posters are often a way that we talk about political issues as they come up, and they're easily shareable and distributed. But it's really exciting to see your work, because I agree. Like, we on the left, on it as the working class, we not only deserve beautiful, like really thoughtful and thought-provoking, detail-oriented art like what you're making, but we have to have it. Like we have to bring these other mediums of art into the fold, and it can't just be that art kind of reflects the it's not just that we're making art in order to promote individual actions or things that we're doing on a like short-term scale, but that we actually have to build our own traditions and our own, like, a new way of building the world. And so I totally agree, it's really exciting to see your work, and just to think about all of the mediums that we can use to tell these stories of how we're building our movements.
Well, thanks, y'all. I swear I didn't set you up for that. But I really appreciate that. It means a lot. Mr. Franklin has joined us briefly. But yeah, no, I think that like I really like that concept of not just that we deserve it, but that like we need it. That like yeah, I think capitalism has many bad things about it, but one of them is that it does degrade so much of culture and does sort of like turn culture. That's why there's such a huge fight around culture and around groups maintaining their culture in the face of capitalism. and the just sort of acidic way that capitalism eats into almost every aspect of that and tries to resell it to us and like degrades what it meant at one time. I think that there is a huge cultural struggle around developing revolutionary traditions, and revolutionary, like, yeah, artifacts, objects, memories. I think that that's a huge site of struggle because we lose so much every day in biodiversity, as well as just cultural diversity, and our own image of ourselves is like narrowed down to like an individual who works on an app and is on a Zoom call. And yeah, it's getting a little bleak here with the coming out of the pandemic as far as what capitalism is willing to offer people. And so yeah, I think that that role of imagination and memory. But yeah, thank you for the shout out. That means a lot. And I will now artfully transition to a question, bashfully. I think like we've talked a little bit about the hopeful side of like where we see art at playing a role. Where do you see artists getting hung up from actually playing that role? Like, what do you see holding back other artists that you know, or other artists that you've interacted with, from like engaging more fully with that work? And you don't have to name names. It's not meant to be like they're bad people. It's just sort of like our system isn't built to like support this sort of work. So like, what holds us back?
Well, I think one thing that comes to mind right away is just, I mean, I think we've already named it a little bit. Like there's this in North America, because I think it is specific to the way that we experience capitalism in the belly of the beast. There's a, well, I mean, I think it also happens in other places, but I just, this is kind of the context that I'm thinking about, especially right now. There's a tendency for, well, there are a lot of things at play, but I think one thing that holds us back is the way that artists are kind of siloed into like professionalization, or that artists are, it's like, oh, you can only be an artist, or you can only like proclaim yourself an artist, or you can only show your art, or you can only sing for a crowd, or you can only do your dance if you do this as your profession and you're trying to make money from it. It's just, you see it everywhere. And I think I wasn't as like distressed about that before, but then Vivek and I actually had the opportunity to go to Cuba a couple of weeks ago, on a brigade from North America that was there for a friendship meeting, and we had the chance to go visit a lot of different spaces in Havana. But one of the and every single place we went, there was some kind of cultural activity, some kind of performance, some kind of music. And that's for a lot of reasons. Cuba prioritizes art. Cuba has art schools and promotes art and culture like very widely, in a completely different way than we've ever experienced in the US, for sure. And that's been the case since the revolution. But something that's, and so of course there are people who dedicate themselves to art and dedicate themselves to music and do that as their revolutionary work on the day-to-day. But that's not the only people who do art, or the only people who are front and center and so eager and ready to share their work. It was like, we went to ALAM, the Latin American School of Medicine, and we were there to see and meet and discuss with some students that are there, getting like their medical educations. And so if you imagine like walking into a medical school, I never would have expected to be greeted by the medical students by hearing like their amazing voices singing, them like out sharing their dances. But there was this whole stage set up, and we heard like students were like doing like spoken word poetry. There were like all different types of dances, amazing singers, like musicians, bands. It was amazing. And it was like these people, not only were they talented, but like they were also, there was this sense of really excitement to share their work and share their art with other people, which even though that's not even their main focus of their studies, they're studying to be doctors, but they were still really just excited to share this with us. So I thought that was really touching and really showed just really showed the difference in priority and difference in the way that our culture is formed based on the priority that art is placed with. And so I think that's kind of a lesson that we can draw from and try to figure out how to change or shift that culture of sharing and culture of art making here.
Yeah, so good. And one other thing I want to mention about Cuba, this was like Hannah mentioned, a really amazing opportunity and privilege to be able to go there and learn about sort of their entire model of development. And just so it's known, Cuba has like the most art educators per capita, I think. And they're making all these advances in art, not because they've got like AI art or something going on there, because they have a lot of art educators and they're like focusing on it and it's a way of life. But sort of to just extend one of Hannah's points a little bit, something that I've noticed in the US, and a comrade of ours, Lillian, brought this up on the trip that we were on in Cuba, like there's a nervousness that a lot of us feel about expressing ourselves out of fear that like we'll be shamed for it. Like Hannah said, if we're not at a professional level, like I'm nervous to sing karaoke around my friends because I am so like caught up in if I sound shitty or not. Like, and in Cuba, there's just like maybe some version of that exists, but we really didn't see it. There's just like a really openness about sharing your talents, even if it's like deeply amateuristic or something. There's just like not the same level of apprehension that you find like people, maybe especially people of like our generation, like here in the United States. And I think that's like tied really closely with that professionalization point. And I think it's because like in American culture or like European culture, I guess, like your worth in society is like tied to how much money you can make, how much like money you can command for a piece of art that you've produced, or how many gallery showings you've been in or whatever as an artist. And so I think that really just like makes you fearful of expressing and like engaging in culture freely and openly. But I found that to be really different in Cuba, just like a real openness about sharing. This is like one other point, like what holds artists back from embracing this role. Again, this might be just sort of like a personal experience, but I think like once you start producing revolutionary art in a culture that's dominated by sort of the capitalists and the ruling class, it can feel alienating. Like you can be ostracized from like your typical sort of art world, or if you're like a professional designer, that sort of is like a tick mark against you if you're making like art that's too political, or you're pushing certain political messages or whatever in your work. It can feel really isolating, and sort of like cast you aside from the rest of your community a little bit. I see that starting to change, of course, but for me at least, I can see a lot of artists who I think that's held them back in particular.
Yeah, I think each of you touched on obviously a lot with those points. I think I hear a lot of like what essentially you're describing as sort of like this petty bourgeois mindset of like kind of like precarity and like defensiveness, and like I think that is true of a lot of artists, that kind of clinging on to an identity of artist as opposed to like worker or community member, because the only way we understand artists is as this sort of like separate class that sort of like desperately tries to make it as opposed to like a part of a community and art as an integrated part of life. I think what I heard both of you kind of describing is like art as part of life as opposed to art as like a profession that you fail at, which is I think how it's often framed as in the United States. Even when you're in like high school and stuff, like say you're good at art, like the response you get from 95% of the people in your life is like, yeah, but you're not going to do that. And so you stop drawing, I guess. Like that's like a huge thing. Like I interact with a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, I drew a little bit in middle school and then I stopped. And it's just like, that seems like a really early age to give up on like all cultural engagement aside from consumption. Like, and like and then develop complexes around not being good enough. It's like, well, yeah, if any of us stop doing something in middle school and then rely on that level of skill, we're probably not going to be able to express ourselves in the way we would like to, or ride a bike. um I rode a bike in elementary school, but I think that I also just like that the point about AI I think is very interesting with respect to that too, is that the AI stuff is sort of bullshit in many ways and like a gimmick, and like we get to make memes really fast. Yay. But I mean, there's some really dangerous stuff I think around just replacing a bunch of workers. As with every transformation in technology, it's like, oh, cool, magazines don't need to pay an illustrator anymore. So there's like 10,000 jobs gone. And those are like kind of entry level or basic level jobs, not necessarily entry level, but like that maintain lives for artists while they do other work. And I think that like there's that part, but I also see a lot of that, like what you're describing, of that need to be good. Folks are kind of being defensive around it, being like, well, I came up with the words to type into the thing, and then I made these beautiful images. So I made them. I made the beautiful images. And it's sort of this like capitalist quest to skip over the act of labor and to simply like press a button and produce a thing and then claim it and then appropriate it as your own. That I think my thoughts aren't fully formed, but I think it's a very interesting like reflection of how folks in the West and in America in particular, as we're saying, like think about artwork. It's like it's something to display, it is something to obtain, it is something like, if artwork were about expressing ourselves in our communities, why would we be impressed that you pressed a button that like scraped the internet to express yourself? Like that's not particularly like humanizing or informative, or like why would I look at that? But if we think of art just as like, I produce a thing that makes me look cute or makes an astronaut on the moon look epic, like then I guess that's what AI art is for. And like I think there's a very dangerous sort of like feedback loop that's feeding into that each you described.
Yeah, it's a curious thing that's happening right now. I feel like I keep seeing like bits and pieces of the debate happening online, and um but I guess the thing that I feel like I'm thinking of, it makes me think about, is this idea of process, because it's something that we talk a lot about with revolution too, that it's not like, oh, revolution happens and suddenly you got socialism and it's everything's perfect. It's like it requires this whole process and something that's continuing. And like in Cuba, they still, they're saying we're experiencing our revolutionary process, or the process continues, which is very true. And I think, it's disconnected a little bit from what we're talking about here, but it's also not. Like, I think the thing that we have to talk about and recognize and embrace more fully, I think, is the process of art. And what it and that's what you're saying too, I think, is that it's about the process that happens as the art is made, and it's less about the product or what's finished. Of course that's important too, but it's also about the process. And I think that is, yeah, that's also visible in some of the work in the show as well. Like you two are both part of the show. Bringing it back. But you two were both part of the show Vital Lines, which I actually didn't mention at the beginning, because it then got folded into the show at the People's Summit. But Vital Lines was this project that we put together at the beginning of this year, 2022, which brought 6 artists from the US and 6 artists from Cuba together and into collaboration, to discuss these like elements of the Cuban Revolution, and then to make your own separate pieces. But the idea was that it was about the process as well, about the conversations that could happen between artists, and then the product is something that we can talk about and like examine and think about the different products that came out of the process. But it was very much about the process. I don't know if either of you would want to talk more about what that experience was like for you, but I think for me it was like really special for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, I'll share some tidbits about it, and Ian would love to hear your point of view on it too. Um, that project was really like the first time I've collaborated honestly with like any other artist on like a one-on-one basis like that. Um, and then it was even more special that it was like an artist not from my own region, somebody from Cuba who again has like Cuba has its own history of art and culture that is sort of distinct from like our North American perspective on art and culture. So I think it was really great. There's like a lot of things about it that were really fascinating to me. One, and this is like a really like maybe like kind of trivial thing, but there's a bit of a language barrier. So it forces you to like find interesting ways to communicate ideas visually. Um, and in that you discover some interesting things about how different cultures and people interpret certain ideas, even in the way we give and receive feedback, which is like such a big part of like the work we do as artists, is like hearing other people's feedback and kind of incorporating it. That was really interesting, to sort of figure out like the norms of how you give and receive feedback. um, and I think just like being in conversation with another artist like really broadens your horizons. Like I, as an artist, like have a tendency to fall back into like what's comfortable for me, like producing work that um I feel like I have a good command of like how to, do certain like graphic design techniques or use certain software tools or whatever. But working with Kalia, who was like my partner from Cuba, like she was really pushing me to like think bigger and think more critically. And I think that's like the influence of like the Cuban art, revolutionary art culture that's like been imparted onto her was sort of imparted onto me. And it's really like stuck with me now. Like a lot of the time I'm producing art now, like Kalia sort of words are in the back of my mind to think about like how I can, be more thoughtful and critical and like embrace that, the challenge of the process a little bit more, like Hannah was saying. So I don't know. I don't know if that answers the question, but it was really formative for me. And I also feel like I've kind of made a friend who we can sort of share and bounce ideas off of outside of the context of that specific project. So really, really great for me.
Yeah, I was also very honored to participate in that project. I think I definitely struggled a bit more with the communication across email. So we kind of like weren't able to connect as much as I wanted to. And I think both of us were pretty busy. So it was sort of like initially negotiating language barrier stuff was sort of like you said, an initial road bump or sort of like messaging back and forth, and both of us were being potentially a little too deferential. And kind of like, well, we can speak in your language. No, I can try it in your language. Like I think we both said that, and then we both like did an email for a week. um and so yeah, we bounced some ideas back and forth. I think like I would be a little self-critical in that like I was making my poster too late to maybe incorporate all of the ideas that my partner offered. But Greta was very nice about it and very kind. Yeah, I think like I honestly would like to another go at that sort of collaboration, just because I didn't get as much of the experience, and I would say most of that is on me. But I really was honored by the experience, and I think like that feeds into what you were saying, Hannah, about like yeah, that process of like that's bringing like cultural workers together, that's bringing connections across nation and across imperialism. um and I think like regardless of what is sort of produced at the end of the day, like what's produced is sort of that struggle of like meaning and like collaboration. And I think like what I hear and what we've been talking about a bit is the art world here is often very worried about failure, and there's a lot of posturing around that. Like there's a lot of like everybody has to be, I would say Kanye West until recently, but Kanye West now no one wants to be Kanye West because he's being yeah. But everyone has to be like larger than life. Like I'm the best, I'm a god, I'm the greatest artist in human history, as opposed to being like, I made a thing. Let us put it into the group of things that we've all made and engage with that. Which I find much more interesting, and I think as is much more like hopeful for the future. Like I don't aspire to be a golden god of art. I inspire to be part of a community that I'm helping express itself through my talents. And like I think we're all struggling towards that. No one's there yet, but yeah, I think that's an interesting piece of just like that fear of failure and the need for posturing that I think that sort of process broke through a little bit, and I think like I would like to see more of.
Yeah, I want to add maybe one quick thought to that. Like, I I've been like in the like sort of technology design world. I hate even admitting it and saying it here, but I've been in that world for a long time. Over a decade, and like the way people think about art, they're so radically different from the way like artists of the movement, if you will, kind of think about art. Like there, the goal, like you said, is to be the first mover, like to come up with like the most innovative, sort of like most on trend, avant-garde sort of thing. And I have like fallen into that too, like being a part of that world. Like I want my work to win awards, or like that's what I thought success looks like. But what's really interesting is like as I've gotten deeper into sort of like producing revolutionary art, albeit I'm still very early in that process, like what brings me joy and satisfaction now is like seeing how all of our work kind of influences each other. And like there's more joy that comes out of like, I'll notice that I'm doing something in my work that like comes almost directly from Hannah, or like comes directly from you. And I'll see that in like how sort of maybe my work has influenced some other people too. And there's something really special about that. Like we're collectively building like the aesthetics of the left in North America, if you will. Like it's a slow process, and I think eventually we need to get a lot more structured about it. But at least for right now, like that brings me so much more happiness than like if my thing gets the most likes, or if like my piece wins some like award or something. Like that becomes really inconsequential. And like now the goal is like how can we collectively contribute to building a direction for like left artists. And that, I mean, it's a really welcome change. The stress that you feel just like trying to produce the correct thing that's going to like win the thing or whatever is like so it's just so stress inducing. Whereas now it feels there's almost like a pressure up. There's a different type of pressure now to like have your work be meaningful and like build the social movement you're trying to build. But it is, I don't know, it's really eased things for me and made me feel a lot more excited and hungry to create.
Winning the thing is like winning over the people, winning so winning the revolution. It's a longer term goal, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think it's something I've said a lot throughout my time organizing also, is just like it's kind of liberating to be on the left in many ways. Obviously because we're fighting for actual human liberation, but also because you don't have to be a Superman. Like the conservative ideologies, capitalist ideologies all sort of circle around to this, like you need to be the superhuman who wins and makes the most money and becomes like the voice of truth and reality. And like A, that's impossible in a silly fantasy, but B, it's a lot of stress. And on the left, to be able to like release some of that and be like, I am part of a collective. Like I am putting some stuff out into this community and like hearing things that I add into, like, yeah, like you said, it's hopeful and it gets you out of your head, it gets you out of your studio, it gets you into like, hey, you can celebrate each other as opposed to compete with each other. And also like we can't compete on likes because Shenbi would just win. So I think that like that's just a reality. But yeah, check out Left Aesthetic. But yeah, no, that's something I also feel very deeply, is this feeling of like you don't have to be the individual perfect person. You need to connect with your community and with other folks who are taking that step forward together. My facilitator role always breaks down in these when I'm excited. We're getting towards the end. I know Hannah, you had to split. So maybe we can shift over into like the last two questions here. One of which is like advice that you might have if somebody is like making a lot of art and is like, okay, how do I make this more involved in movement work? Or if somebody's really involved in movement work and wants to think about how to invest more in their artwork. If you got like, doesn't have to be just one thing, but some maybe short form advice for folks who are kind of operating there.
Well, I think one thing is for people, and I think it's really exciting. Well, either going from movement work to artwork or artwork to movement work are both very exciting for their own reasons. I think that people, those of us who are like organizers, already doing movement work in the streets, sometimes I think it's just a push to share your work, like to recognize that people want to see it. And like we were talking about at the beginning of this too, that like it's also our duty to share it in order to be part of the battle of ideas. Like it's not just a frivolous thing. I mean, I think there's a, you know, we also have to talk about individualism when we talk about art, because it's something that can be very like tied up in one another, especially in the individual world that we live in right now. But like, you know, there are ways, like everything we've been talking about is like ways that doesn't have to be the case, and that we are building this movement of artists who are engaged in struggle and who are doing this work in order to like contribute to the struggles that we're waging. So I think part of it is like just recognizing like, oh, okay, I do this work and it doesn't have to be sitting inside by itself, and it doesn't have to just be something I see, but actually it would really help our movement, and it would really help the struggles that we're waging to share it. So I think that's one thing, is just like that recognition. For artists who are already making work and then want for it to become part of movements, I think we're seeing that all the time now. I think especially like after the big uprisings in 2020, that was a huge push for a lot of people to kind of like recognize that, well, we're seeing that in the corporate world too. Suddenly there's this idea that everyone has to have a political stance, including like corporations, which that's a whole nother thing. We could get into a whole conversation about that. But I do think I do think that it's a positive thing that artists are becoming more engaged politically, who hadn't necessarily been political in the past. I mean, and even even artists who are not necessarily political already, that's kind of like a new thing. Or, you know, it's not a new thing for artists to be super politically engaged. Like when you think about the 20s and the 30s and the struggles against fascism across the world, but in the US for sure, there were so many, it's like kind of crazy how many artists there are that you see in very mainstream spaces. You can go into super normal museums and see, or like you can go into the MoMA and see so many socialist artists who are super active in the battle against fascism that are shown everywhere. And things like the John Reed clubs, which were these clubs of artists and writers that got together and had art exhibitions, had like social space for artists to collaborate with one another. So I guess all that to say that I think there's a lot of space for artists to become part of movement. I think it's important for artists to also like recognize that we also have to shift the way we think about art when we recognize that we want to use it for struggle. It's not all about individual artists, and we have to get away from that sense. I think we're trained that way in art school and trained that way in the world we live in, but we have to start really practicing what it looks like to make art and build art with a collective mindset.
Yes. All of that. Totally agree with. I'll just add a couple of things. Maybe a couple of sort of like philosophical things, and then one like very practical thing. I think like people making revolutionary art just like have to read. I think it just like comes with the territory. Like we have to study movements before us. Of course, like the context in which we're producing artwork is unique, and we're experiencing for the first time. Like this is the first time that it's 2022 in North America, and our conditions are unique, and we should, you know, be appreciative of that and cognizant of that. But there's so much incredible theoretical knowledge and even like literal visual inspiration that you can gather from previous historical movements. Of course, we have a responsibility to not just like regurgitate things that already exist and kind of move things forward. But I think reading and study is like a very, very important important piece of the puzzle. And for me, at least personally, it's done a lot to advance like even the quality of the work I'm producing. The other thing is I think you just have to like make a lot of stuff. And there's sometimes a tendency to like I know we're talking about process, and process is super, super important, but I do find with some artists, there's like a tendency to just like get stuck in the process, maybe out of like fear of what happens in the next stage when you actually have to put pen to paper or mouse to screen or whatever your medium is. And I think the greatest thing you can do to get more comfortable with producing and like building your own skill set is just to like constantly be producing within some reasonable limit. Don't beat yourself up over it. But I think the constant production is really important. And then the last thing, this is like maybe a bit of like counterintuitive advice, perhaps, but I think it's really useful if you're getting started with creating art, if like you're new to the discipline. I think it's okay and maybe even helpful to recreate things that already exist, not to share them as your own, of course, and plagiarize, but it's a really edifying experience to try and recreate a piece of art that already exists. And if you do that over and over, you start to develop a sense of like some good rules of thumb. Like what are the sort of rules that these artists are following? If you're making digital work, you get a sense of like how to choose the right typeface sizes or what are the right color palettes or whatever. And like the more you do that, you learn kind of the rules. And as you learn the rules, then you can figure out kind of what your own take is on it and kind of how to break the rules. But a good way to learn the foundational things is to try to recreate. There's like a lot to be learned from that process. So those would be the ones. Like read, make a lot of stuff, and don't be afraid in the early days to copy things, because it'll help you kind of develop your own perspective over time.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I think I really love the two biggies that I had there were like share and read. I think are really big ones. I think, yeah, get your work out there, know what you're talking about, and try to improve. I think, yeah. Listen to that a couple of times, folks. Those are both really good summaries of things to do. Before we sign off here, do you all have anything you want to plug or share? Places where folks, I know the People's Forum has a fair bit of this work on their website, so if you don't know, we can put that in the comments. But other things you all want to spread, share, invite folks to, places to see your work, etc.
Well, definitely the People's Forum website. We have a section on there with the art from most of these exhibitions from this year, and so definitely check that out. And I don't think I have anything else right now that I want to plug, although I will say that the People's Forum has a really great course called Art, Culture, and Resistance, which has been taught before, but is going to be happening again this spring. So I would recommend, for if anyone is interested in having more conversations like this, but in a setting with other people, it's always there's always a virtual option as well. So I keep on the lookout for that.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. Nothing else from me. Definitely check out the People's Forum. Amazing educational content, amazing artwork. It is really such an important part of the movement that's being built here. So if you're unfamiliar, definitely dig into the stuff that they have to offer.
Oh, and I just thought one more thing. Red Books Day is coming up February 21st, which is an exciting day to celebrate the publishing of the Communist Manifesto. It's an international holiday, and we're popularizing it in the US too. So everyone should celebrate no matter where you are. Lots of bookstores, like independent bookstores across the country, will be celebrating, but we will have an exciting exhibition yet to be announced, but an exhibition and definitely some programming at the People's Forum then too.
Awesome. And if you're in the Detroit area, we actually have a political artist meetup once a month. We started last month, so this month is the second time, but it'll be the next one is this Thursday, the 15th at 6:30 over at Swords and Plowshares. So thank you, Vivek. Thank you, Hannah. This has been lovely. Get to your next meetings, and yeah, I'll try to include all the links we mentioned in the comments below, so folks can find them. But we'll see y'all soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ian.
This was great.